I hope everyone's having a great day. So I have some really creepy, disturbing Reddit stories for you guys to listen to, and I hope you guys enjoy them. With that said, if you do, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy. So this happened when I was 10 years old. I was at a ski resort with my dad and stepmom, and 3 sisters when this happened. My 2 sisters' dad and stepmom were still out skiing, but me and my sister Ava got cold, so we went back to the hotel to go get some food. We had sat at the restaurant in the hotel until my stepmom came down. We asked her if she could hold the table so we could go to the room quickly, so that we could drop off our ski jackets. So we take the elevator, and once we get off, we start to walk to our room. That's when I hear someone behind me then say, "Hey, keep in mind, we're both about 11 at this time." I didn't think he was talking to us, so I just ignored it. So we walked into our room, but before we can close the door, the man steps in the doorway. He was tall, probably about 6 foot, and he looked pretty old, maybe about in his early 60s or late 50s. And he was wearing the hotel's staff uniform, but just without the logos. The thing that raised a big red flag, that he was wearing black surgical gloves. He then says, "Hey, I was talking to you." We then spin around, caught off guard, and then says, us too, which he then says, "Yeah, you guys, I was wondering if you could grab a picture for me and come into my room and pour some water for me. Our parents always told us to never trust strangers, and we already got a bad vibe from him, so we politely declined." His tone then got a bit annoyed, and he said, "Come on, it'll only take a second. Can you please just pour me some water in my room?" At this point, we already knew this wasn't right, so we said, "No." Yet again, the conversation went back and forth for almost 3 minutes, until he actually tried to walk into our room. Our instincts kicked in at this point, and I then ran towards the door, and then said, "Sir, we're good." And then I slammed the door on him. Ava and I sat in our hotel room for about 10 minutes panicking on how we were going to leave, to go talk to our parents, because we left our phones downstairs. We looked out at the peephole, and he was gone, so we bolted down the hallway and ran back down the stairs to the restaurant. Once we told our stepmom, she was mortified, and she went to the office security. They had interviewed us, and they had asked for his description, because they didn't have any cameras in the hallway. When we gave them the description, they told us that nobody with that description worked there, and that most of them were young, broke college students. It was at this point that it really set in that if we had accepted and helped this man, we might have died. So please, everyone, teach your kids about stranger danger, and to the creepy hotel guy that didn't actually even work there, I pray and hope that we never encounter you again. This is the story of someone I knew and I cut ties with, because he was a fucking psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes it a let's not meet. I don't know if he uses Reddit, so I'll hide ages and locations. It started about 4 years ago, when I was living at a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister had invited her boyfriend to live into the house, too, and by all accounts, he was a pretty cool guy. At first, very sociable, and really full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks, or we talked about life while having a smoke out in the garden. Within the first month, however, as he started to get comfortable, cracks would start to show in his personality. He would rant about government conspiracies, how he was always a wronged party, how he was big into stigma male shit, in martial arts, and oh hell, how he had a temper. He had this big dog that he'd always kept in the cage that was extremely violent. When he wasn't around the dog, it actually attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trip towards her began, and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and he had dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. This was a rented container, in a storage yard among the outskirts of town we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly, until they called the police. This of course was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend, to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stood close to them, having to pretend to be on his side until he could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming that I was poisoning her against him. To make her mine, she has a new partner now, and they're very happy. We all blocked the psycho ex on everything possible, but he continues to harass them until he eventually disappeared, or so we thought. Fast forward to last year, I started receiving messages over social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn. When I discovered who it was, some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone that I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going, and eventually I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans. I kept talking to this friend coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address, and she panicked. The address in question was at a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party, and I called the police to check the property, claiming suspected break-in. They found 5 people there, including the ex parked out in front, in a butcher's van equipped to food storage and a collection of hammers and rope. Yeah, terrifying. Fuck, this seems small in comparison to all the stories I've read on here. But I'm a 19-year-old female. My whole life, I lived on a small, isolated road, about 15 minutes away from my city. My parents built the house that my siblings and I have lived in our whole lives. I have 3 siblings, all of us being females. We have neighbors, but aren't too close together. Like an urban community, one of our next-door neighbors, let's call him Frank, has lived on his property about as long as my parents have. Growing up, I've always gotten a weird gut feeling from this man, and my mom has always told me to listen to it. I've never been alone with him, and I never plan on it. He lives alone. He had a girlfriend when I was around 10 years old, and he had a dog who sadly passed away a few years back. My older sister and I would go over to his house and spy on him, through a small hole in the barn, when we were younger. Tons of pornography was hung up all over his barn. Growing up, he'd show up to our house whenever we would have a bonfire, or any event where he could hear people having fun. Always unwelcome, and it's obvious no one wants him there, but he would still never leave. His excuse for his behavior is being drug around. In June, I had a graduation party at my house for graduating high school. It was obviously perfect, and I was surrounded by all my loved ones. While things were wrapping up and people started heading home, Frank continued to stay quite usual for now, but nothing less frustrating. We began to have fun, and it got to a point where the only adults there were my parents and Frank. My mom then went inside to go to bed, and my dad was beginning to get tired and kept hinting to Frank that he should be heading home soon. Frank just said, "Alright, man." He then proceeded to pull out a chair and sit and watch us all play beer pong while staring at minors' asses. My older sister went up to my dad and expressed how uncomfortable it had made her. You know how he was staring at a bunch of minors' asses? My dad is not a confrontational man, but always made sure that we feel safe and comfortable, and he will be confrontational when the time comes. My dad then told Frank that he needed to leave immediately. Frank refused, then saying, "I think I'll stay here and watch over the kids while you go to bed." That right there sets us all off. One of my friends then starts yelling at Frank, telling him he needs to leave and that it's not okay for him to be there. And after we ask him multiple times to go, he eventually leaves. But ever since then, he's been making extremely gross and inappropriate comments to my dad about how attractive my younger sister is, who's only 17. My dad had confronted him multiple times, and he will not change his behavior, and will still come over after being told to stay off the property. Whenever I leave my house to go anywhere, especially at night, Frank always watches me through his window and just freaks me out. He'll give us all such a weird, creepy gut feeling, and nothing we do to confront him seems to work. He's done a lot of weird things like this all throughout my childhood, but it's been an all-time high recently. If anyone has any ideas how to stop this, please leave it in the comments. To begin the story, I used to love driving around in my dad's old Chevy. He takes care of it like it was his own wife. Mom always made fun of him whenever she got the opportunity. She said that if the Chevy had a pair of you-know-what, Dad would run away with it. I don't think she meant that, but I did show love whenever she brought it up. Dad taught me everything I needed to know about cars as a teenager. I could fix problems even before I was done with high school. Mom always said it was a waste of time, forcing me to study whenever she caught me in the garage working on the cars. It was impossible for me not to enjoy it, though I felt alive with the wind whipping through my hair. My dad loved to say that every car has its own personality, but my dad just thought that every car was a person. He believed that all cars were capable of having human traits. He always said that if you looked in your eyes, you could see how far you could take life and couldn't go back. I believe him, because that was what Dad taught me. We should never stop looking ahead to where our lives will lead us. There's no point in looking back. We had to take life one day at a time. But now I can't wait to get behind those wheels again and go exploring for lost gems of wisdom and inspiration. It's been a long time since Dad drove us around town, so we have nothing to do but hang out inside the garage, listening to music and watching reruns of old episodes of CSI while eating pizza and drinking cold shitty beer. It doesn't have to be boring. We could make some memories together, and I plan to use the time wisely. Right before I went to leave, I asked Dad if I could get a job so I could save up for my car. At first, he wasn't happy about it, but then he decided to try it. Since then, I've worked 2 jobs. One was as a receptionist at my local convenience store, and another was a part-time at the police station. I knew no one would give me the money to get a car, so I wanted to do that before leaving for college. Even though it's 2 years from now, I wanted to be prepared. Dad always encourages me to do things and live more creatively than I ever did. It would only be fair if he gave me a car, and besides, I probably spend all my hours on the road. After all I want is to go out and have adventures. I want to live a life in ways that others can't. Dad says that they are only of good stories, but sometimes they have lots of holes to fill, and a lot of things that seem to be corrected in the middle. Dad says you must keep going until your story is complete. You know better than anyone that you never really stop moving forward. Dad believes the most powerful tool in the universe is knowing when to stop and doing the opposite. Simultaneously, we always talked when we drove around. I learned a lot of things from him that I never realized when we were at home. Dad was always here. When we were behind the wheel at this point, I couldn't drive, so it made sense. I wasn't about to go and risk getting locked up. My job isn't glamorous, but I worked hard for the tips. Although the salary could be much higher, I usually pick up a few shifts here and there when I'm feeling bored at home. In no time, I could save up enough money for a car. I was certain I didn't have anyone specific on me, but I would love to have options at the time. I didn't have a girlfriend and wasn't really dating. My whole life virtually became about buying my next vehicle. I told my friend Ashley about my ideal car. We went together to a few car dealerships, and man, they were so expensive I could barely hold my thoughts in. We had to run, and there was no way I could afford anything they sold there. Dad laughed when we told him about our trip to the dealership. It was hilarious as it was so tempting just to get one out on finance. Something I probably wouldn't even be accepted for because of my age. When I told Dad, he promised to help me with it later in the week, to go looking for ones that are more affordable. A week passed and Dad was still busy with work, so I stayed home with Alex and his brother Michael. We watched TV and just ate some snacks. It was just great spending the entire weekend with them, but I couldn't stop forgetting in my mind that I just wanted to get my car and get it over and done with. My friends weren't exactly close to me, but we were friendly enough. We shared snacks, listened to music, and spent hours playing Mario Kart. Alex was obsessed with Mario Kart and constantly complained about how the race had slowed down in recent years. On Sunday night, Alex came over and told me that he saw someone selling a blue BMW online and wondered if I wanted to buy it. Dad always talked highly of German mechanics, saying Mercedes and BMWs were up there with some of the most reliable and best engines. Alex said it was a nice color, and it looked pretty cool. It had a body kit, and even he said it thought it had been tuned, but it was probably too expensive, at least I thought. We spent almost 10 minutes looking around, and then we finally found it. To my surprise, it was less expensive than I thought. I had more than enough to cover the car, plus the insurance for it. Dad told me about that one too. I wrote down the seller's contact and called him. After 2 rings, someone picked the phone up. Hello? I heard a rasping voice over the phone, sounding like a man. Hi, I saw your listing for the BMW on Craigslist, the blue one. I said while grinning at myself. Oh yeah, I still got it. So how soon can you come by and pick it up? The guy seemed suspiciously eager to meet with me and kept talking. It depends on who picks it up first. I won't leave it lying around. I quickly cut him off. Yeah, I'll be there next week. I'm sorry, but I have to call my parents first. How does that sound? Fine by me. Just send a grand deposit and I'll hold it for you. I was foolish enough to send a deposit. My dad would have no doubt killed me if he found out. I hung up and grinned to myself, and I couldn't believe I found a car that good of a deal for an M3. My literal dream was finally coming true. Alex and Michael stared at me with confused expressions. So how did it go? What did he say? I would check out the car next week, I said. I've got to tell my parents. The week went by slowly. I was so anxious I could barely wait for Saturday. I already told Dad about it, and he gave me the thumbs up, minus me mentioning anything about the deposit. Mom said it was a waste of money. I knew she wouldn't understand the thing about me buying a really nice fast car. If she got her way, I'd go around on a push bike until I was 90. I walked to the park with my dad and found Terry, who was the owner of the BMW M3. He was stood beside it, just leaning on the roof. I walked up to him and talked for a bit with Dad. There was one thing that worried us. As we kept talking, he absolutely stunk of alcohol. His clothes and his breath smelt. I don't know what he did to himself on Friday night, but it wouldn't matter. All I know is I can't trust anybody these days. Why don't we just go for a spin, Terry asked, to which I nodded. He got in the driver's side and I took the passenger seat, while Dad went in the back. We started off with him doing a couple revs, showing me the mileage counter, the odometer, and a couple other things on the dashboard. The ride was smooth as we left the parking lot, so I thought everything was okay. The guy had the car under control and seemed completely fine. It was just the smell of alcohol that was putting us off. His actions, his words, were not indicating at all that he was in the slightest bit drunk. As we were driving along the road, we got talking some more, but I needed something more enjoyable to remember, so I asked him to throttle it. But as we turned back to drive towards the park, I noticed his hands started shaking. We did a couple PSIEs, accelerations. I asked Terry if I could take over the wheel a few times. He said it was okay and that he had everything under control. I wore my seatbelt to be safe and never took my eyes off the road. I tried to open the cabinet in a split second and Terry moved his hand across my face. I had no idea why, so I moved back. What the hell are you doing? I hear my dad's voice from the back seats. I raised my hand and stared towards the road, thinking about what had just happened and how awkward it had just made the atmosphere within the car. We were now off the road, and before I could react, the car was riding towards a huge tree. Dad started yelling in the back and tried to grab the steering wheel off Terry, but it was too late. The car slammed into the tree and tossed over a few times before coming to a halt. Terry didn't move at first. I thought he was dead. He slowly raised his head eventually and started looking around. We were all groaning in pain, and I no longer heard Dad say anything for around 20 seconds. Terry started trying to push the seat back. He looked like a zombie. He started looking around. I saw Rush crash onto the tree, and then I lied there for several seconds. It was quiet out and dark, and I was shaken up mentally. Everything around us was pitch black, and it appeared like the night had taken over the world. Everything felt surreal as we sat there for a few seconds, until we both realized the movement was still around us. At first, the only sounds I heard were my breathing and Terry's, but after we waited for a while, I couldn't hear Terry anymore. I called to him a few times, and my dad, but neither of them were replying. Both my arms were pinned against the door, as I stared wide open. As the broken windshield, and then I could see Terry's body. My mind screamed for me to get out, but I froze. His mouth was gaped, and he was bleeding from the corner of it, just pouring out. That's when I started screaming, yelling for my life, and I eventually freed myself from the wreckage and called 911. Terry was dead. My dad and myself lived. I woke up sweating profusely. There was nothing to look at, so I covered my eyes with my arm, and I cried softly that night. I dipped in and out of consciousness. I predicted 9 times. Dad didn't even regain consciousness until we got back to the hospital. I made the call, and thank God it saved myself and my father. I had 2 broken shoulders, broken legs, and I lost quite a bit of my blood. Dad had severe whiplash and had been made unconscious from smacking his head on the back of the seat rest. Hard to believe, but there's actually metal prongs connecting the headrests of the front seats. The car was mangled to bits. Terry died at the scene from a heart attack. He was actually drinking while under the influence, so we found out that was the real cause. And after all this, my dad and I live with this being one of our biggest regrets to this day. I hope you guys enjoyed those stories, and if you were to hear any noises in the background, it's my landlord. They tend to make a lot of noise during the worst parts of time. With that said, as always, stay depraved.